Welcome to Mafia Stories, where every story reveals more than crime and power. Here, you'll discover loyalty, betrayal, ambition, and the choices that shape a lifetime. Rain fell across downtown Atlanta in long silver ribbons, washing the towering glass walls of Park Crown Hotel until the entire building shimmered beneath the gray morning sky. Luxury cars stopped one after another beneath the covered entrance while bellmen hurried through the storm, greeting wealthy guests as if the weather itself worked for the hotel. A city like this rarely paused for anyone. It certainly did not pause for people who had already fallen behind. Naomi Carter stepped off a crowded city bus with soaked shoes, a wrinkled employment folder pressed tightly against her chest, and a silent prayer she had repeated throughout the entire ride. She was 11 minutes late. 11 minutes that could decide whether her 7-year-old son would continue sleeping on the worn-out sofa in their tiny apartment or finally have a bedroom of his own someday. She stopped just outside the revolving doors, brushing rainwater from her neatly tied hair before smoothing the inexpensive blouse she had ironed late the night before. Her silver angel pendant slipped from beneath her collar for only a moment before she gently tucked it back inside. It had belonged to her mother, and it was the only piece of jewelry Naomi had never considered selling, even during the hardest months. Taking one steady breath, she stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around her immediately, carrying the scent of polished wood, fresh flowers, and expensive perfume. Crystal chandeliers reflected across spotless marble floors, while soft piano music floated through the magnificent lobby. Every polished surface reminded Naomi that she did not belong in this world. Yet she refused to let that thought change the way she carried herself. She approached the reception desk where a sharply dressed woman reviewed several interview schedules. Vanessa Whitmore barely glanced up before asking for Naomi's name. The moment she checked the list, her expression cooled. "Your interview was scheduled for 9 o'clock, she said without looking at Naomi. "Again, it is now 9:11. Naomi nodded respectfully. "The city bus broke down during the storm. I came as quickly as I could. I am truly sorry." Vanessa closed the folder. Punctuality matters in this hotel. Naomi swallowed the disappointment rising inside her. "Please, I only need a chance to explain." Several applicants waiting nearby quietly looked toward the conversation. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched with the uncomfortable curiosity reserved for someone else's misfortune. Vanessa crossed her arms. "If you cannot arrive on time for an interview, how can guests trust you with their rooms?" Naomi lowered her eyes for only a second before meeting Vanessa's gaze again. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet determination. "Because I have never walked away from responsibility. I have only been delayed by circumstances I could not control. My son is waiting for me to come home with good news today. I am asking for one opportunity, not special treatment." For a brief moment, silence settled across the lobby. Even a nearby concierge paused while organizing luggage. Vanessa remained unmoved. "The interviews are finished. You should apply again another time." Naomi's fingers tightened around the worn folder. She wanted to argue. She wanted to explain everything that had brought her to this moment. Instead, she simply nodded with dignity and turned toward the entrance. At that exact moment, the revolving doors slowly opened once more. Ethan Park entered surrounded by quiet confidence rather than unnecessary attention. His tailored black suit fit perfectly, his white skin contrasted against the dark fabric, and every employee immediately straightened their posture without being asked. Daniel Brooks followed one step behind, reviewing the day's schedule. Ethan walked several steps before stopping without warning. His eyes had settled on the silver angel pendant that had once again slipped free as Naomi adjusted her folder. Time seemed to freeze. The color slowly drained from Ethan's face as memories buried beneath 14 years of silence crashed into the present with overwhelming force. His breathing became uneven. Daniel looked at him with concern, but Ethan barely seemed aware of anyone else inside the hotel. His eyes never left the pendant. Then, almost too quietly for anyone to hear, he whispered words that brought the entire morning to a standstill. "It is you." Naomi Carter remained frozen for a moment, unsure whether the words she had just heard were meant for her or for someone standing somewhere behind her. The magnificent hotel lobby, filled only seconds earlier with quiet conversations and the soft melody of a piano, seemed to lose every sound at once. Ethan Park stood several feet away without moving, his eyes fixed not on her face, but on the silver angel pendant resting against her blouse. Daniel Brooks quietly lowered the tablet in his hands, noticing something he had never witnessed before. Ethan Park was a man whose expression rarely changed, whether negotiating billion-dollar business deals or handling unexpected crises inside his company. Yet now, the confidence that usually surrounded him had been replaced by unmistakable disbelief. Naomi instinctively slipped the pendant back beneath her collar, uncertain why it had suddenly become the center of attention. She forced a polite smile despite the growing confusion inside her. "Sir, do we know each other?" she asked gently. Ethan blinked several times before collecting himself. Years of discipline slowly returned to his posture, although the surprise remained visible in his eyes. "Perhaps," he answered quietly. "Or perhaps I have been looking for an answer for a very long time." Vanessa Whitmore stepped forward, eager to restore order inside the lobby. "Mr. Park, this applicant arrived late. I have already informed her that the interview process has ended." Ethan never looked away from Naomi. "Has she caused any disturbance?" he asked calmly. Vanessa hesitated. "No." "Has she been disrespectful to anyone?" "No." Ethan finally turned toward Vanessa. "Then I see no reason why a conversation cannot still happen." His voice remained calm, yet every employee nearby immediately understood that the discussion was over. Daniel stepped forward and spoke with professional courtesy. "Miss Carter, if you would please come with us." Naomi looked around the enormous lobby, wondering whether she had misunderstood what was happening. Only moments ago, she had been preparing herself for another rejection. Now the owner of the entire hotel was personally inviting her upstairs. She followed Daniel through polished hallways lined with elegant artwork, luxurious carpeting, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the busy streets below. Every step made her increasingly aware of how far this world seemed from the small apartment where her son Caleb was probably finishing breakfast before school. Inside the executive office, sunlight poured across rich walnut furniture and shelves filled with awards recognizing years of business success. Ethan remained standing beside the windows for several seconds before slowly turning toward her. "Please have a seat," he said. Naomi carefully placed her worn employment folder on the conference table before sitting with perfect posture. She refused to let nervousness appear stronger than her dignity. Ethan studied her quietly, almost as though comparing the woman before him with a memory that refused to become clear. Finally he spoke. "Where did you get the pendant?" Naomi gently touched the silver angel resting beneath her fingertips. "It belonged to my mother. She gave it to me when I was 15 years old. She told me that no matter how difficult life became, I should never let hardship convince me to stop helping people." Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Those words seemed to awaken another forgotten piece of the past. "Did your family always live in Atlanta?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "Mostly on the east side of the city. We never moved very far because my mother could not travel after becoming ill." Ethan continued carefully. "Do you remember a rainy night about 14 years ago near Interstate 85? Naomi searched her memory but found only scattered fragments without meaning. She slowly shook her head. "I remember many rainy nights, but nothing specific." Ethan remained silent. Daniel noticed the growing uncertainty and quietly changed the direction of the conversation. "Your application says you completed 2 years of nursing school before leaving the program. May I ask why?" Naomi answered without hesitation. "My mother became seriously ill. Someone had to care for her full time, and eventually I became pregnant with my son. Finishing school stopped being possible. Providing for my family became more important than finishing my education." There was no bitterness in her voice, only honesty. Ethan listened without interrupting. The answers were simple, sincere, and completely different from the image many people would have assumed after seeing only her modest appearance. He finally opened her employment folder and signed the last page. Sliding it gently across the table, he looked directly into her eyes. "Miss Carter, if you still wish to work here, your 30-day probation begins today. I do not offer charity. I offer opportunity. What happens next will depend entirely on your work." Naomi stared at the signed document in disbelief before quietly saying the only words she felt were worthy of the moment. "Thank you. I will not disappoint you." As she left the office holding the papers with both hands, Ethan remained standing beside the window. The moment the door closed, He turned toward Daniel with an expression that had returned only once before in his life. Find every record connected to the accident near Interstate 85 14 years ago, he said quietly. I need to know whether destiny has finally brought her back. Naomi Carter arrived the following morning, nearly 40 minutes before her shift began. The rain had disappeared overnight, leaving the city washed clean beneath a bright Georgia sunrise. She stood outside the employee entrance with a small lunch packed from the groceries she had carefully stretched through the week and a handwritten note from Caleb tucked safely inside her bag. Before leaving for school, he had smiled and told her, "You are going to do great, Mom." Those simple words carried more weight than anything else she owned. Inside the employee locker room, several housekeepers greeted one another with familiar conversations while preparing for another busy day. Naomi quietly introduced herself, listening more than speaking. Some smiled politely while others simply nodded before returning to their routines. Vanessa Whitmore entered moments later carrying a clipboard. Her professional expression revealed nothing from the previous morning. Everyone has assignments, she announced. New employees earn trust through consistency. Miss Carter, you will cover the 12th floor today. It has the highest checkout volume. Several experienced employees exchanged quick glances. They all knew the 12th floor was the most demanding section in the hotel, requiring every room to be cleaned and prepared before afternoon arrivals. Naomi accepted the assignment without complaint. She thanked Vanessa, collected her supplies, and pushed the housekeeping cart toward the elevators. Every movement reflected quiet determination rather than hesitation. By late morning, she had already finished several rooms with remarkable attention to detail. She straightened every picture frame, polished every mirror until it reflected perfectly, folded towels with careful precision, and left handwritten welcome cards exactly as instructed during orientation. She did not rush simply to finish faster. Instead, she worked with the same care she once used while studying nursing, believing that every guest deserved to feel respected, whether or not they ever learned her name. Around noon, she noticed another housekeeper struggling to push an overloaded linen cart after one of its wheels became stuck on the carpet. Without being asked, Naomi parked her own cart and helped lift the heavy load over the damaged section. The older employee smiled with visible relief. "Thank you," she said warmly. "Most people pretend they do not see things like that." Naomi answered with a gentle smile. Someone always notices kindness, even if they never say anything. Unbeknownst to both women, a security camera quietly recorded the brief exchange. Upstairs, Daniel Brooks happened to review routine operational footage while verifying staffing reports requested by Ethan. The moment he noticed Naomi stopping her own work simply to help a coworker, he made no comment, but quietly marked the timestamp. Ethan had not asked him to watch her performance closely. Yet Daniel found himself becoming curious about the woman whose presence had unsettled the most composed man he had ever known. Later that afternoon, while preparing a suite for arriving guests, Naomi heard the soft sound of something striking the marble hallway floor. She stepped outside and found an elderly woman sitting carefully against the wall, her shopping bag resting beside her. The woman looked embarrassed more than frightened. Naomi immediately knelt beside her while maintaining a respectful distance. "Ma'am, are you feeling dizzy?" she asked calmly. The woman nodded. "Just a little. I stood up too quickly." Naomi remembered enough from her nursing education to remain composed. She encouraged the woman to breathe slowly, offered a bottle of water from her housekeeping cart, and contacted the front desk to request medical assistance as a precaution. She stayed beside the woman until help arrived, speaking gently about ordinary things to keep her relaxed. After several minutes, color slowly returned to the woman's face. "Thank you," the elderly guest whispered with grateful eyes. Most people would have hurried past. As Naomi reached forward to help adjust the woman's sweater, the silver angel pendant slipped into view once again. The elderly woman's expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened as though she had just recognized a face from another lifetime. She gently reached toward the pendant without touching it. "My goodness," she whispered almost to herself. "Where did you get that necklace?" Naomi looked at her with growing curiosity. It was now the second time in 2 days that someone had reacted to the pendant with unmistakable emotion. Before she could answer, the woman slowly lifted her eyes to Naomi's face, studying every feature with increasing certainty. The silence between them grew heavier with every passing second until the woman quietly spoke words that made Naomi's heart begin to race. "I believe we have met before, even if you do not remember me." Naomi looked at the elderly woman with polite confusion, searching her memory for a familiar face, but finding only uncertainty. She offered a gentle smile as hotel medical staff arrived with a wheelchair, but the woman softly raised a hand. "I am feeling much better now," she assured them. "This young lady has already done exactly what I needed." After a brief examination confirmed that nothing serious had happened, the nurse encouraged the woman to rest in her suite for the afternoon. Before leaving, the woman reached into her handbag and removed a business card embossed with elegant gold lettering. "My name is Margaret Ellis," she said warmly. "I spent more than 30 years as an emergency room nurse before retiring. I have learned to trust my memory, especially when it refuses to let something go." Naomi accepted the card respectfully. "It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Ellis. I am sorry, but I truly do not remember meeting you before." Margaret studied the silver angel pendant once again before smiling gently. "That does not surprise me. Sometimes the people who change our lives remember the event least because they were simply doing what came naturally." Those words lingered in Naomi's mind long after Margaret disappeared into the elevator. The rest of the afternoon passed in a quiet rhythm of freshly made beds, polished windows, folded towels, and carefully prepared guest rooms. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the strange encounters surrounding the necklace. First, Mr. Park had reacted with unmistakable shock. Now a retired nurse seemed equally convinced that the pendant belonged to an unforgettable memory. Naomi had worn it nearly every day for 14 years, but never before had anyone paid it more than a passing compliment. Upstairs in his executive office, Ethan Park stood silently beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Daniel Brooks entered carrying a slim folder containing the first results of his search. "I located archived emergency response reports from 14 years ago," Daniel said carefully. "The digital records are incomplete because the county updated its system years later, but there are enough documents to establish the timeline." Ethan accepted the folder without sitting down. Inside were faded incident summaries, weather reports describing severe thunderstorms, and a map marking the location of a late evening traffic accident along Interstate 85. None of the reports identified the young woman who remained with the injured victim before emergency responders arrived. She had apparently left before officers could record her statement. Ethan slowly closed the folder. "There has to be more." Daniel nodded. "There is one name that appears repeatedly in the medical records. Margaret Ellis. She was the emergency room nurse on duty when the victim arrived at the hospital." Ethan looked toward the closed office door as if the answer had been standing in his hotel all along. "She is staying here now, is she not?" Daniel confirmed with a quiet nod. "She checked in yesterday for a medical conference reunion." Ethan understood that coincidence alone could no longer explain the events unfolding around him. Meanwhile, Margaret rested comfortably in her suite, unable to stop thinking about the young housekeeper who had instinctively responded exactly as she had many years earlier. She remembered arriving at the emergency department after a chaotic night of storms. She remembered an unidentified teenage girl soaked from head to toe, refusing to leave until she knew the injured young man would survive. Most of all, she remembered the silver angel pendant shining beneath bright hospital lights while the frightened teenager quietly encouraged the unconscious patient to keep breathing until help arrived. Faces fade over time, but moments of extraordinary compassion rarely do. Margaret reached for the bedside telephone and requested that Daniel Brooks visit her room whenever his schedule allowed. She believed the missing pieces of a story that had remained unfinished for 14 years were finally beginning to return. Downstairs, unaware of every conversation taking place around her, Naomi completed the final room on the 12th floor with the same care she had shown all day. She placed the last folded towel onto the marble vanity, stepped back to inspect her work, and smiled with quiet satisfaction. She still believed she was simply trying to earn an honest living. She had no idea that two people inside the same hotel were now chasing memories that would soon change. Not only how they saw her, but how they understood the most important night of their own lives. The following morning unfolded with unusual quiet inside Park Crown Hotel, yet beneath its polished routine, Invisible threads were slowly pulling several lives toward the same forgotten moment. Naomi Carter continued her probation with the same steady determination she had shown since her first hour on the job. She greeted every guest with genuine kindness, thanked every coworker who offered advice, and completed every assignment without expecting praise. To her, excellence was not something reserved for important people. It was a promise she made to herself long ago when life had taken away nearly everything except her integrity. While replacing fresh flowers in the presidential suite, she paused briefly beside the wide windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. For just a second, she wondered whether Caleb had enjoyed his science test that morning. She smiled quietly before returning to work, unaware that someone else inside the building had spent the entire night thinking about her instead. In the executive office, Ethan Park sat across from Margaret Ellis while Daniel Brooks organized several age documents across the conference table. The faded reports, weather summaries, and emergency response records painted only fragments of the same evening, leaving Margaret to supply the details no official paperwork could ever preserve. She gently adjusted her glasses before speaking. It was one of the worst storms I had worked through that year. The emergency department was overwhelmed, ambulances were arriving one after another, and everyone was focused on keeping patients stable. But I remember one teenager better than almost anyone else from that night. Ethan listened without interrupting. Margaret continued slowly, allowing every memory to settle naturally. She was soaking wet, exhausted, and looked far too young to carry so much responsibility. She kept asking whether the injured young man would survive. She did not ask for his name. She did not ask who he was. She only wanted to know if he would live. Ethan lowered his eyes. He remembered almost nothing after the accident itself, only flashes of rain, flashing emergency lights, and the faint sound of a calm young voice refusing to let him give up. Margaret reached into her handbag and carefully unfolded a small envelope she had kept for years. Inside was an old newspaper clipping describing the accident. The article mentioned an unidentified teenage girl who disappeared before authorities could thank her for remaining beside the victim until first responders arrived. Margaret smiled gently. Most people remember dramatic moments because of fear. I remember them because of compassion. That girl never once asked whether the young man deserved help. She simply stayed. Daniel quietly placed another document beside the newspaper clipping. According to property records, Naomi Carter lived less than 2 miles from the accident scene at that time. The dates also match her age. Ethan looked toward the city beyond the windows, feeling the weight of 14 unanswered years beginning to settle into place. Yet one question remained. If she was truly that girl, he asked softly, why does she not remember me? Margaret answered with the quiet wisdom earned through decades in medicine. Because she was not trying to remember a face. She was trying to save a life. The moments that define us are not always the moments we carry with us. Sometimes they remain inside us without asking permission. Those words lingered in the room long after the conversation ended. Downstairs, Naomi finished preparing another guest room when she noticed a frightened little boy standing alone outside an elevator, holding a stuffed bear tightly against his chest. She gently knelt to his eye level and calmly asked whether he was lost. Within minutes, she reunited him with his grateful parents, who thanked her repeatedly before hurrying away. Naomi simply smiled and returned to work without expecting recognition. From a nearby hallway, Ethan happened to witness the entire exchange while walking toward a business meeting. He watched the effortless kindness in Naomi's actions and realized something that no investigation, report, or witness statement could fully explain. Compassion had never been a single decision in her life. It was simply the way she moved through the world. At that moment, he understood that whether or not every memory eventually returned, one truth had already become impossible to deny. The woman quietly making beds, comforting strangers, and asking for nothing beyond an honest opportunity was the same person who had once stopped on a stormy night to help a frightened young man whom everyone else had hurried past. Ethan Park waited until the hotel became quieter before asking Daniel Brooks to invite Naomi Carter to the executive office after her shift ended. The request was delivered with complete professionalism, leaving Naomi uncertain whether she had made a mistake or whether another assignment awaited her. She carefully straightened her housekeeping uniform before entering the office, still carrying the same worn notebook where she kept reminders about every new procedure she was learning. The evening sun stretched across the polished floor, covering the room in warm golden light that softened even the sharp edges of expensive furniture. Ethan stood beside the conference table instead of behind his desk, a subtle choice that made the room feel less like a meeting between an employer and an employee and more like a conversation between two people connected by something neither of them fully understood. Daniel quietly placed several documents on the table before stepping back. Naomi immediately noticed an old newspaper clipping, weather reports, and a faded sketch of a teenage girl wearing a small angel pendant. Her eyes slowly drifted toward the drawing. Something about it felt strangely familiar, yet she could not explain why. Ethan spoke with unusual gentleness. I have spent 14 years trying to discover who stayed beside me on the worst night of my life. Naomi looked at him without speaking. He continued, his voice calm but filled with emotion that years of discipline could no longer hide. There was a terrible storm. My vehicle left the road. I remember almost nothing except rain, flashing emergency lights, and the voice of someone who refused to leave me alone. Margaret Ellis quietly entered the office after Daniel opened the door for her. She smiled warmly at Naomi before pointing toward the newspaper clipping. That young woman never gave anyone her name, Margaret said softly. She stayed beside an injured stranger, kept him awake by talking to him, and waited until paramedics arrived. Before anyone could thank her, she disappeared into the rain. Naomi stared at the faded paper. Her breathing became slower as forgotten memories began surfacing one small piece at a time. She remembered hurrying home after helping her sick mother buy medicine. She remembered seeing headlights disappear through heavy rain. She remembered running toward the damaged vehicle without stopping to think about danger or inconvenience. Then another memory returned with remarkable clarity. A frightened young man had struggled to keep his eyes open while she kept repeating the same simple sentence. Stay with me. Help is coming. Naomi covered her mouth as the realization settled into her heart. I remember, she whispered. Not everything. Just pieces. Ethan nodded slowly. Those pieces were enough to save my life. Silence filled the office, not because anyone lacked words, but because gratitude sometimes becomes too large for ordinary conversation. Ethan opened another folder containing documents that represented opportunities most people could only dream about. I cannot repay what you did, he said honestly, but I would like to pay for you to complete your education, provide a home for you and Caleb, and make certain your future is secure. Naomi listened respectfully before gently closing the folder with both hands and sliding it back across the table. Her smile carried kindness rather than rejection. Mr. Park, I did not help you because I expected anything in return. That night you were simply someone who needed another person to stay beside you. Ethan lowered his eyes. Please allow me to do something. Naomi answered without hesitation. You already have. You gave me a chance to earn honest work when everyone else saw only a late applicant. If you truly wish to honor what happened years ago, then continue giving people opportunities before judging their circumstances. That gift will help more families than anything you could ever give only to me. Margaret quietly wiped away a tear while Daniel remained completely still, recognizing that he was witnessing something far more valuable than a business agreement. Ethan slowly nodded, understanding that the greatest lesson of his life had arrived from the one person who refused to treat kindness like a transaction. At that very moment, a sharp knock interrupted the peaceful silence. A hotel security supervisor entered the office with visible concern. I am sorry to interrupt, he said carefully. A guest in the presidential suite has reported that a valuable family heirloom watch is missing. According to the housekeeping schedule, Miss Carter was the last employee assigned to the room before the guest discovered it was gone. Every eye in the room turned toward Naomi. She did not panic. She did not defend herself with anger or remind anyone of the conversation they had just shared. Instead, she calmly met Ethan's eyes and spoke with quiet confidence. Investigate everything. The truth does not need anyone to protect it. The atmosphere inside the executive office changed immediately, yet no one raised a voice. Ethan Park looked first at Naomi Carter, then at the security supervisor standing respectfully near the doorway. Years of leadership had taught him that the first version of any story was rarely the complete one. Tell me exactly what happened, he said calmly. The supervisor opened a digital report. The guest in the presidential suite reported that a family heirloom watch could not be located. Housekeeping records confirmed that Miss Carter completed the scheduled service before the guest returned. The guest requested that hotel management investigate immediately. Naomi remained perfectly still. She neither stepped backward nor attempted to explain herself before hearing the facts. Margaret Ellis quietly observed the room, recognizing that true character often revealed itself most clearly during moments of misunderstanding. Ethan finally spoke. "Miss Carter, until we know everything, I am asking only for your cooperation." Naomi nodded without hesitation. "You have it. Please examine every record available. If I have done nothing wrong, the truth will eventually arrive." Her calm response surprised even the security supervisor. Many innocent people reacted with fear when accused of something they did not do. Naomi instead demonstrated complete confidence in the investigation itself. Ethan turned toward Daniel Brooks. "Begin with the objective evidence. Review electronic key records, hallway cameras, housekeeping schedules, laundry collection logs, and every staff entry connected to the suite. We will not make assumptions." Daniel immediately organized the process with quiet efficiency. Within minutes, security personnel began collecting digital information from multiple departments. Meanwhile, Vanessa Whitmore arrived after receiving notification about the incident. The moment she learned that Naomi had serviced the suite, concern quickly hardened into suspicion. "This is exactly why probation periods exist," she said carefully, although several nearby employees could hear her words. "Guests trust us with valuable belongings. We cannot overlook procedures." Ethan looked directly at Vanessa. "Procedures require evidence, not conclusions." Vanessa lowered her eyes, but said nothing further. Even so, whispers quietly spread through employee corridors. Some workers wondered whether the new housekeeper had made a terrible mistake. Others refused to believe someone who consistently helped co-workers and guests could suddenly betray that trust. Naomi heard fragments of those conversations while waiting in a private conference room. Yet she refused to let them change her composure. She remembered her mother's advice from years earlier. When people cannot see the whole picture, do not argue with every opinion. Continue standing beside the truth until it speaks for itself. Hours passed as Daniel reviewed security footage frame by frame. The electronic key system confirmed that Naomi had entered the presidential suite exactly as scheduled and remained inside for the appropriate amount of time. She left carrying only her standard housekeeping supplies. 8 minutes later, however, another electronic entry appeared. Daniel paused the report. The second access belonged to Vanessa Whitmore. He immediately requested hallway video from the same time period. The recording showed Vanessa entering the suite with an empty housekeeping tote before leaving several minutes later, carrying folded towels collected for laundry service. Nothing appeared unusual at first glance. Yet Daniel requested that the hotel laundry department temporarily stop processing every item collected from the presidential floor that afternoon. Ethan quietly joined the inspection without announcing his presence. Large rolling bins filled with freshly gathered linens waited to be sorted. One attendant carefully unfolded each towel, while another checked every pocket and seam according to standard lost property procedures. Suddenly, a metallic object slipped from the center of a thick white bath towel and landed softly on the inspection table. The room became completely silent. Resting beneath the bright overhead lights was the missing heirloom watch. It had never been stolen. It had been accidentally wrapped inside a towel removed from the suite before anyone realized it remained there. Daniel slowly looked toward Vanessa. She stared at the watch with disbelief before remembering the extra towels she had personally gathered after noticing one display arrangement needed adjustment. Her shoulders dropped as understanding replaced certainty. She had not caused the watch to disappear intentionally, but her assumption that Naomi must have been responsible had nearly destroyed the reputation of an innocent woman. Ethan carefully picked up the watch before turning toward everyone gathered in the room. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable weight. Facts protected the truth today. Assumptions almost buried it. By the next morning, the truth about the missing watch had quietly spread throughout Park Crown Hotel. But Ethan Park made certain that the lesson spread further than the rumor ever had. Rather than allowing whispered conversations to define what had happened, he called a meeting with department supervisors before the first guests arrived for breakfast. The recovered heirloom watch rested inside a protective case on the conference table, not as evidence against anyone, but as a reminder of how quickly assumptions could become unfair accusations. Vanessa Whitmore stood near the end of the table with visible humility, replacing the confidence she usually carried. She had barely slept after realizing how close she had come to damaging the reputation of someone who had done nothing except perform her job with honesty. Ethan looked around the room before speaking. Yesterday, we did not experience a theft. We experienced the danger of reaching conclusions before completing an investigation. Those are not the same thing. No one interrupted. Every manager understood that the conversation was about something much larger than a misplaced watch. Ethan continued calmly. From this day forward, every concern involving an employee will be handled through verified facts, documented evidence, and equal treatment. No person's title, experience, or first impression will replace the truth. Several supervisors quietly nodded. Daniel Brooks had already prepared updated investigation procedures that required electronic records, security reviews, and complete documentation before disciplinary decisions could ever be made. The policy would apply equally to every employee, from the newest housekeeper to senior management. Ethan then turned toward Vanessa. She stepped forward without hesitation and looked directly at Naomi Carter, who had been invited to attend the meeting. The room became completely silent. "Miss Carter," Vanessa said sincerely, "I owe you an apology. I allowed my first impression to become stronger than my judgment. I believed I was protecting the hotel, but instead I failed to protect the dignity of one of our own employees. I am truly sorry." Naomi held Vanessa's gaze for a quiet moment before offering a gentle smile. There was no satisfaction in proving someone wrong, only compassion for someone willing to admit a mistake. "Thank you," she answered softly. "We all make mistakes. The important part is choosing what we learn from them." Several employees lowered their eyes, reflecting on their own conversations from the previous day. Ethan noticed that Naomi had once again chosen grace instead of resentment. She had every opportunity to embarrass the woman who had doubted her, yet she chose to preserve another person's dignity instead of reclaiming her own through humiliation. That decision impressed him more deeply than any act of heroism from the past. After the meeting ended, Ethan asked Daniel to begin developing a new employee education program focused not only on hospitality standards, but also on fairness, respect, and professional responsibility. He also established a scholarship fund that would help employees continue their education if they wished to pursue new opportunities within the company. When Daniel suggested naming the program after Naomi because of everything she had inspired, Ethan quietly shook his head. "She never helped people, so her name would be remembered," he replied. "Let the program represent every employee who deserves an opportunity before judgment." Later that afternoon, Naomi returned to her regular duties as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She greeted guests with the same warm smile, helped co-workers organize supplies before the evening shift, and quietly finished every assignment on schedule. As she prepared to leave for the day, Caleb arrived with a neighbor who had kindly offered to bring him to the hotel after school. The little boy ran toward his mother with a wide smile, before politely introducing himself to Ethan. Looking around the magnificent lobby with innocent curiosity, Caleb asked, "Is it hard being the boss of such a big hotel?" Ethan smiled for the first time that day. "Sometimes," he answered honestly. Caleb thought for a moment before asking another question. "What is the most important job here?" Ethan looked toward Naomi as she gently adjusted her son's backpack. "The person who reminds everyone else how to treat people," he said quietly. Caleb smiled proudly without realizing that every adult standing nearby understood exactly who Ethan meant. In that simple conversation, the Grand Hotel felt less like a place built from marble and glass, and more like a place where character had finally become more valuable than status. 6 months passed, and the changing seasons brought quiet. Transformations that could never be measured by a calendar alone. Park Crown Hotel remained as elegant as ever, its marble floors still reflecting crystal chandeliers, and its lobby still welcoming travelers from around the world. Yet something far more important had changed within its walls. Employees greeted one another with greater respect. New managers completed fairness training before supervising their first teams. Every workplace investigation followed the same careful process Ethan Park had established after the misunderstanding surrounding the missing watch. The scholarship program quietly opened doors for housekeepers, maintenance workers, restaurant servers, and front desk associates who dreamed of advancing their careers. No advertisements celebrated the program, and no photographs promoted it. It simply became part of the hotel's culture, growing through actions instead of publicity. Naomi Carter completed every stage of her probation with exceptional evaluations from guests, co-workers, and supervisors alike. Encouraged by the scholarship fund, she enrolled in evening hospitality management courses while continuing to work full-time. Many nights, she returned home long after sunset, studied after Caleb had fallen asleep, and woke before dawn to begin another day. She never complained because every lesson represented another opportunity to build the future she had promised her son. On a bright autumn morning, employees gathered once again beneath the grand chandeliers of the main lobby. This time there was no investigation, no uncertainty, and no misunderstanding waiting to unfold. Ethan stood before his staff with Daniel Brooks and department leaders nearby. Margaret Ellis had returned as a special guest after receiving a personal invitation, smiling proudly as she watched familiar faces fill the room. Caleb stood beside his mother wearing his best school clothes, holding her hand with unmistakable pride. Ethan welcomed everyone before speaking with calm sincerity. Today we recognize someone whose work has reminded us that excellence is not measured only by skill. It is measured by integrity, compassion, consistency, and the quiet decision to do the right thing even when no one is watching. He turned toward Naomi with genuine respect. Based on outstanding performance, exceptional guest feedback, successful completion of advanced training, and the trust she has earned from her colleagues, Naomi Carter is being promoted to Guest Experience Coordinator. The lobby filled with warm applause that grew louder as co-workers rose to their feet. Vanessa Whitmore was the first to begin clapping. When Naomi accepted her new name badge, Vanessa stepped forward and embraced her warmly. There was no trace of the distance that had once separated them, only mutual respect built through honesty and humility. Naomi thanked everyone before looking toward Ethan. "Thank you for giving me an opportunity to earn this position instead of giving it to me." Ethan smiled. "You earned every part of it." He never mentioned the storm 14 years earlier. He never told the assembled employees that the woman standing before them had once saved his life. That story belonged to Naomi, not to him, and her promotion stood on her own accomplishments rather than an old act of kindness. After the ceremony ended, Caleb looked up at his mother with shining eyes. "I told you that you were going to do great," he said with the simple confidence only a child could possess. Naomi laughed softly and hugged him tightly. Nearby, Margaret quietly handed Ethan the old newspaper clipping she had carried for years. He looked at it one final time before carefully placing it inside a frame that would remain in his private office, not as a reminder of debt, but as a reminder that the greatest turning points in life often begin with ordinary people making extraordinary choices. As the afternoon sunlight poured through the towering glass windows, the silver angel pendant around Naomi's neck caught the light once again. This time no one looked at it with confusion or unanswered questions. It had become a quiet symbol of compassion freely given, dignity faithfully protected, and hope passed from one life to another. Ethan watched Naomi walk through the lobby with Caleb at her side, greeting employees and guests with the same gentle kindness she had shown from her very first day. He finally understood that real leadership was never about commanding respect through power. It was about creating a place where every person's humanity could be recognized before their circumstances were judged. And on that unforgettable day, everyone inside Park Crown Hotel remembered what true dignity looks like.